Okay, let's dive in. We're doing something a little different today. We're taking a pretty heavy piece of 19th century German philosophy.
Very heavy.
And using it as a lens, almost like a diagnostic tool, to look at this deep societal issue in modern day Pakistan, specifically the huge gap between the rich and the poor.
Right. It's a really unexpected pairing, but I think you'll find it's incredibly revealing. The source material we looked at just paints this picture of extreme disparity. You have this tiny elite with enormous wealth,
right,
and then this massive population that is, for all intents and purposes, locked out of that prosperity.
And that's where we find this paradox, the thing that really needs explaining. Because in these communities that are struggling financially, poverty it's not just an economic state.
No, not at all.
It gets turned into something else. It becomes like a source of moral identity. It's almost valorized, a sign of being pure or spiritually superior.
And that moral flip, that inversion, is exactly what we're going to unpack. Our whole mission here is to use Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of slave morality to try and understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Basically asking, is this feeling of moral superiority a genuine expression of, say, piety? Or is it something else? A really sophisticated psychological defense against being, well, powerless?
So to do that, we have to start with the basics. Nietzsche's whole system is built on these two opposing ways of seeing the world. Let's start with the first one, master morality.
Okay, so at the core of Nietzsche's thinking, he sees these two completely different ways that values get created. Master morality is, well, it's life-affirming, it's active.
Active, not reactive.
Exactly. The master, the powerful person, defines good based on themselves. So anything that feels noble, strong, excellent, vital, that's good. It's a yes-say morality.
So it's like an artist or maybe an entrepreneur who just creates their own rules for what excellence is. It's not a response to anything.
Precisely. They look at the world and they just say, that is strong, that is a success, therefore it is good. And things like weakness or meekness, they're just bad. Not thievul, just lacking.
Yeah.
Unimportant.
Okay, so that's one side of the coin. Now let's flip it to the one that's really the focus of our deep dive. Slave morality.
And slave morality is the complete inverse. It grows specifically among people who are, left out, people who suffer for a long time from powerlessness, from being excluded. And unlike master morality, it is fundamentally reactive.
Reactive, okay.
It doesn't start by saying, we are good. It starts by pointing a finger and saying, they, the powerful ones, are evil.
And the source material really hammers this point home. This reaction isn't just simple frustration. It's driven by this very specific psychological engine that Nietzsche called, Ressentiment.
Ressentiment, yeah. And it's the engine for this whole process. You can think of it as this deep, simmering poison of hostility and envy. And it only grows because the powerless can't act on it.
So you can't fight back physically, you can't win economically.
Right. So that anger, that need for revenge, it has nowhere to go. It turns inward.
And when that energy turns inward, what happens? It starts to warp the whole value system, doesn't it? As a way to kind of cope with reality.
It's the only way to cope. Since the weak can't win in the real world, they launch a symbolic war.
Yeah.
They declare that all the things the powerful have, their success, their ambition, their wealth, it's all morally bankrupt. It's evil.
It's a psychological coup, basically.
That's a great way to put it. And the sources we looked at, they lay out these 4 key steps in this process, and they just map so perfectly onto what we see in Pakistan.
Okay, let's walk through them.
The first is psychological compensation. So any quality that comes from being weak, like being meek or humble or obedient, it gets redefined. It's elevated into the highest possible moral virtue. Your weakness becomes your greatest good.
And the second is value inversion. So all the things the master class values. Ambition, drive, success. In slave morality, those become proof of corruption, greed, vice.
Yep. Being successful suddenly means you're morally dirty.
Yeah.
Then the third, and this is so relevant here, is the moral superiority of suffering. Poverty and hardship are no longer bad things to escape. They become signs of your higher moral character, a sign you're closer to God.
That's a huge psychological benefit.
It's massive. And the fourth part is where that bottled up anger, the resentment, finally gets its release. He calls it unconscious revenge.
Oh.
It's this whole system of stories and beliefs that morally punish the powerful. Narratives that say, sure, they have money, but they're miserable. They're spiritually empty.
And what's just wild is how clearly this framework helps you see the moral logic that's been shaped by Pakistan's economy. It's like the economic inequality is literally writing the moral script for people.
In villages, in cities, It's the same pattern.
Okay, so let's get into that application. This is where the theory hits the ground. The source material really drives home this idea that for many people, poverty stops being about money and becomes, well, who they are morally.
Yeah, these narratives of purity are incredibly powerful. You have whole communities saying out loud that their poverty is actually a good thing.
Yes.
It's protecting them from sin, from materialism, from corruption.
You can see it in the language, right? Their research found these direct quotes like, "We thank God we are not sinful like the rich."
Sure, our struggles keep us close to God. It's a way of framing the poor as just inherently more pious, more humble, better people than the wealthy. Poverty becomes the place where you find spiritual excellence.
But let me push back on that for a second. Couldn't that just be sincere faith? If someone says, "My struggles bring me closer to God," isn't it possible that's just pure theology and not some psychological trick?
That's a fantastic question, and I think the key distinction lies in the source of the value. Is it active or reactive? If it was just pure piety, you could value your own humility on its own terms.
Yeah.
But what the data shows is that the two ideas are linked. We are good because they are bad. Our purity is defined in direct opposition to their corruption. The goodness is defined negatively.
Ah, I see. It needs an enemy to exist. It's built on condemning the other side.
Exactly. And you can feel the psychological tension, because this praise for poverty exists right alongside this unspoken but very real desire to get ahead.
Right. They want their kids to go to school and have a better life.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
And that contradiction hating wealth while also wanting it, that's the perfect recipe for resentment. When you feel like the system is rigged and you can't get ahead.
Then condemning the rich becomes a necessary coping mechanism. It's the only way to hold on to your dignity.
If you can't beat them, you have to defeat them morally.
Which brings us perfectly to the other side of this. While poverty is being glorified, the wealthy are just demonized. The contrast is incredibly sharp.
And that's the unconscious revenge in action. Since you can't actually punish the elite, you do it symbolically. You create and spread these stories that say their comfort is actually a kind of prison, a source of deep misery.
And some of the specific claims from the source material are amazing. They often have zero evidence behind them, but they work so well as symbols.
Oh yeah, you hear that the rich cannot sleep at night, or they have no peace, that they need pills just to get through the day.
Or that they're just morally empty.
And the ultimate judgment. God has cursed their wealth. The very thing the poor might secretly want is redefined as a curse. It's a genius move, psychologically. It turns privilege into a kind of torment.
It is the ultimate moral judo flip. By saying the powerful are miserable on the inside, the powerless claim moral victory, and, they soothe their own suffering.
The moral victory is total, even if nothing in the material world has changed.
That brings us to a really important distinction you mentioned earlier, one that Nietzsche himself makes. The difference between voluntary and imposed poverty.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial to get right. Voluntary poverty. Think of a monk or a Sufi mystic who chooses to renounce wealth. Nietzsche saw that as an expression of great strength, of agency.
They have the power to have things, but they choose not to.
Right. It's an affirming choice. But that is not what we're talking about here. The glorification we're seeing in this context is almost entirely about imposed poverty. It is not a choice made from a position of strength. It's a strategy to reframe deprivation as a kind of inner strength.
It's about preserving dignity when you have very little control over your life.
It's resignation reframed as spiritual choice.
And of course, these ideas don't exist in a bubble. The sources point out how existing cultural and religious beliefs act like a megaphone for this.
A huge amplifier. Islamic teachings on simplicity, on patient saber, they provide this ready-made divine language. It makes this reframing feel like it's not just a social idea, but God's will.
And you see it in Sufi traditions too, right? This idea of the poverty of the heart being a good thing. It all fits together so neatly.
Which leads us to the most critical part of this whole discussion. So what? If this moral framework protects people psychologically, what's the downside? What does it cost society in the long run?
And the sources are pretty clear that while it helps people cope, it actually gets in the way of real empowerment, of real change.
The first, and maybe the biggest consequence, is passive endurance. If you successfully redefine poverty as a virtue, a sign of goodness, well then the pressure to demand structural change just melts away.
You stop questioning the system because you're too busy moralizing your own endurance within it.
And that bleeds right into politics. Political movements start to focus on denouncing the elites as morally corrupt individuals.
Instead of attacking the actual institutions, the tax code, the land laws, education access, the whole debate becomes about character, not policy.
It's a huge distraction. And then there's the third consequence, the inhibition of ambition. If you deeply believe that you are morally superior because you are poor,
Then why would you ever strive to become something you've already labeled as a curse?
why would you? And finally, all of this just deepens social division. It creates this bitter class antagonism, but with no path toward dialogue or reform. It just locks everyone into their moral trenches.
So we've basically used Nietzsche to show how these moral stories are built as a brilliant psychological response to being shut out of the economy. It's a story about keeping your dignity when you don't have power.
And that brings us to the final provocative thought from the research. This current moral framework, it offers consolation. It helps people cope with a reality they can't change.
Right. It's reactive.
But for real empowerment, for things to actually change, a totally new moral framework would be needed.
What would that look like?
It would mean seeing poverty not as a virtue to be endured, but as a condition, a social problem that demands to be fixed. The moral focus would have to shift from finding value in suffering to demanding the right to flourish. And that leap from reactive coping to proactive empowerment, that's the real challenge ahead, and something for you to think about as you watch this region evolve.